Well, it is time for another episode of Cabernet and Pray, and today we have got a fun one. Today is an interview with April Ajoy. She is the author of Star-Spangled Jesus, Leaving Christian Nationalism and Finding a True Faith. She's also a content creator and podcast host who uses humor to shine light on harmful, toxic, and sometimes just weird traits of American evangelicalism. After growing up an evangelist kid, entrenched in Christian nationalism, and working in conservative Christian media, she saw the harm that it caused firsthand. Still a Christian, she now uses her platform to expose the dangers of Christian nationalism while promoting a more inclusive faith. April has been featured on BuzzFeed, CNN, Newsweek, and more. And she's been married to Beecher for 10 years, and they have 2 daughters together. This episode was a wild ride, so much fun. Just enjoyed April a ton, and you're going to see why. We get into some great theology. She's got some great insights and a lot of laughter as well. So enjoy episode 36, Star-Spangled Jesus.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly. There's so many things happening in this conversation right now. 1,000 years from now, people are going to be looking at this podcast saying, so this was the breakthrough.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I've been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on the show.
I will also say as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table, we're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thank you for the hospitality that this particular podcast provides folks like myself, and I know others, to be curious around their faith practices.
I really appreciate this menu, what you're doing. It is fun, and yet you dig into the deep stuff.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So I
got a little spicy there. It's the peach wine. I keep going on these tangents because of this peach wine.
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
Welcome to the podcast, April.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to get into this conversation with you, and we've got lots of questions we're going to want to get to. So before we do that, we're going to talk about what we're drinking, and this is going to be fun. I am drinking a 2016, I don't know how you say this, Clos Floridine. This is a Bordeaux blend from France. I'm a sucker for Bordeaux blends, which usually means it's Cabernet and Merlot. This one is 73% Cabernet, 27% Merlot, so this is a little bit more aggressive on the Bordeaux blends. I'm getting black cherry, blueberry, violet, black pepper, lots of really interesting notes. It is 10:30 in the morning as I record this, my time. So this was an aggressive choice I made today, April, to go with this wine at 10:30 in the morning. But I'm doing it. What do you got in your glass?
Okay, I have to confess that I don't drink all that often because my spouse doesn't drink. So I'm drinking what was in my fridge, which is a peach-flavored white wine, just a generic white wine. It didn't specify. I bought it in 2024. I searched all over the bottle and could not find a date. I bought it in 2024 from the local liquor barn, and it's from a winery in Ohio.
Okay, there you go.
I wish I don't have much else to say.
So have you had this wine before?
I have. Yes.
Okay,
It's
so
good. I do like
it's
it.
a wine you like.
Yeah, I like fruity wines, I
Okay,
guess.
this is a judgment-free zone, all right? A lot of
Okay.
people bring a lot of different opinions, and I always say it comes down to two things. There are wines you like and wines you don't like. And
Yes.
beyond that is fun, but you have found a wine you like. So cheers to you,
Thank
and
you.
cheers to all of you listeners or watchers of the pod if you are also enjoying a glass with us today as well. All right, April, as we dive in, I've had a chance to read a lot of your journey in your book, but someone who's listening to you right now may not have had that. A question I love to open with for our guests, for everyone to kind of get a frame of like, who are we talking to? What's been a little bit of your perspective? And my opening question is, how has your faith changed over the last 10 years of your life?
Drastically, the short answer. I guess the most big difference between how I thought 10 years ago and how I think now is I hold my faith and my beliefs very loosely. And I don't have this, I used to have this, like, I know that I know that I know that I know without a doubt. It was very dogmatic and fundamentalist, even though I probably would have said I wasn't a fundamentalist. And now I am very open to the idea that I could be wrong. And I probably am wrong on some things. And I certainly have beliefs, but I think of faith is more impactful when it's used as a verb and we act out our faith and actually do things instead of trying to make sure everybody thinks and has the right beliefs, because what does that do for the world? Nothing, really.
Yeah. You could just tell you seem more freed up than the previous version of you maybe 10 years ago would feel.
Yeah, no, I feel like, back in the day when I was going to very evangelical churches, there was this real push to be like, you need to come to our church and believe what we believe so you can have freedom in Christ. Like, freedom in Christ was the thing that everyone strived for, that we all said that we had. We're like, well, yeah, I mean, sure, we don't do all these things that the world does, but we have freedom in Christ. But really, we didn't. Like, I feel like I have way more freedom in Christ now. Like, this is actually freedom in Christ, just to exist and stop having to, hyperanalyze every little thought that I have and be like, is that me? Is that God? Is that a demon? Is that Satan? Is that my flesh? Like, that was not freedom. That was exhausting.
So you're saying if you have to convince everybody that you have freedom, you may not actually have it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's great. And you do such a good job in your book of sharing like your inner monologue of like, you could tell like your conservative upbringing of like how it just like chimes in and then you're working through it. And that adds a ton of humor to the book. And you're going to see that in a few of the quotes I'm going to read today. A question a quote you have here that I thought was so great. It's going to dive us right into our topic today as we get into some of this. But it piggybacks well on how your own journey has changed a little bit. You kind of pose this question. You say, how did someone like me go from being a dutiful culture warrior to a, quote, little mindless meat puppet flapping her gums, end quote, because, quote, her demons are shaking her cage now, end quote. And yes, that's a real comment someone made about me. And then you say this, the short answer is easy, Donald Trump. And so if anyone's like, hey, where is she at on this? This is going to get real obvious really quick. But I would say this was a major turning point. Obviously, you're sharing for you, for me as well, for many Christians, probably many people listening to this podcast right now. So here's my question. As we sit here today, what do you think it means for the church now that he's going to be president again? What should we be mentally thinking as we know what this did to us in 2016? What does 2024 and beyond look like?
Well, I think we saw after 4 years of Trump in 2020, there's also a pandemic, which I think added to this, but we saw a really big kind of deconstruction movement of people that were waking up and were finally saying out loud things that they had been quietly thinking for the last 4 years because of how much of white evangelical culture just celebrated Donald Trump. And I think we're going to see that again over the next 4 years. I think, I'm not a prophet, even though they like to call me a false prophet. I'm like, I didn't claim to be a true prophet, but
If you're
I,
a false one, at least you're a prophet, I guess.
right. Like, and I'm a woman, so I guess progressive that they could even consider me a prophet, even
There
if
you go.
a false
Take
one.
it. Run with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Look at you being woke. But yeah, I think we're going to see another big deconstruction push of people that are sitting in pews today in their churches, quietly having doubts and questions of being like, why are we all in on Trump? Especially because I think the next 4 years, a second Trump presidency is going to be worse. I think there's going to be a lot more dire consequences that are going to affect a lot more people negatively. And so I think I think we're going to see that movement again. And I think it's going to be really good. I think it's actually the, quote unquote revival that everyone's been praying for all these years, is people leaving those toxic churches and finding God outside of church walls. So yeah, anyway, I guess that's what I think we can see. And I think it's important too that those of us that did all this work already to continue speaking out and to be a place that the people that are exiting can go to, so that they can know that they're also not alone and that they are not the first people to have questioned the power structure that is the white evangelical church.
Yeah. You reminded me, I got an email this week from a podcast listener who literally was just thanking me for keeping these conversations going, to the point you just made, saying it's so encouraging because this continues to be a struggle in their family. And they shared a story with me on a recent holiday. One of the dad of the family, I guess the patriarch, came in wearing some Trump clothing, and it became this real issue when they finally said, like, hey, please don't wear that to the family. And then people aren't talking, and like all of this stuff. And it's just like a reminder, like, we all lived through that. And now I think everyone's kind of going, where is this going the next time? And I agree with you. I think it's going to be more extreme. But I also think hearing you say that almost gives me a little bit of encouragement of maybe this will be, for a lot more people, a chance for them to say, hey, you know what? It's time for me to explore other things. And those of us who are trying to create space for that might be a really cool season of more and more people having this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I definitely want to try to be a soft landing for those people too, and not be like, you idiots, like, what took you so long? But to just be like, hey, it's okay to change your mind. Like, we want people to change their mind. Right. So I'm not that it negates any past harm, but I do kind of feel like one reason I wrote the book and why I make the content that I make is kind of like my outward form of repentance for the, my complicity in that very harmful structure, and in Christian nationalism. So yeah.
Your content creation is your mea culpa, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
I like it. Okay, to that, it was one of the questions I had as I was reading your book, and you share a lot of things that you previously wrote, songs that you had made, things that, I mean, like I was kind of amazed at your transparency, because like if that were me, I'd be like, this one's never gonna see the light of day again. But you just bring it up, like, here's what I wrote, here's what I believed, and I have a lot of those things in my past as well. Sermons I preached that I would never preach again, things I wrote, blog posts that I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? So my question is, as someone who has changed quite a bit, how do you process some of the earlier things you said and wrote that you adamantly disagree with today? Because you seem to have figured this out well.
Well, I mean, it's still cringy. Like, I still cringe at a lot of it. And I regret, I have regrets. Like, I wish I would have woken up sooner. I wish I would have questioned things more openly sooner. Like, when I had those little doubts, I wish I didn't shove them down. But I think it goes in stages. Like, initially, I was like pissed. And I was really angry with myself, and I thought I was stupid, and I felt like I had internalized a lot of the guilt and the shame of, like, I can't believe I did that, and that I wasn't smarter, and that I didn't see the red flags, but that was also kind of in, like, my burn it all down, like, angry stage, like, which I think is, like, the first stage of deconstruction. Like, we're just pissed, like, it's all terrible. Right. But since it's been several years, I look back on myself, and I have a lot of empathy and grace for her, because she, like, I was when I was in that world, I was just doing what I thought was right in the moment. And I truly believed it. I wasn't a bad actor. I wasn't trying to pull a fast one over anybody. Like, I genuinely believed everything that I said and that I did, and that doesn't, that's not a cop out, but I can just like, in a way, I try to remember where I was because it helps me have grace for those who are still in it today. Not that it negates any harm that's being caused. Like, and I want to make that clear. Like, I still need to call out harm and harmful beliefs. But I think, remember, like, in some ways, I'm grateful that I was so openly Christian nationalist because it gives me a little bit of street cred when I'm talking to people who are Christian nationalists today, because I can speak their language. I can approach the topic, not look how bad you are being. I could say, look how bad I was. Look at the harm that I caused. And I think it's just disarms people a little bit because they don't feel immediately attacked. They're looking at my story. They're looking at me. And hopefully they can just kind of like, I'm putting up a little bit of a mirror is my goal, and that people can change, because people that are Christian nationalists or white evangelical in those churches, like, when you grow up in that world, like, we're taught not to listen to any outside person, like anyone who doesn't believe what we believe. We don't listen to atheists. We don't listen to agnostics. We don't listen to Muslims or liberals or, anyone that's not in that world. And so I think because I come from that world, I can speak that language and I can empathize, and I know why they're doing what they're doing and why they believe what they believe, that I can get through a little bit.
That's a great answer. Man,
Oh, thank you.
It's so good. I'm just like, yeah, I like that. I'll take that. Okay, here's a quote that I think could be really helpful for someone listening, going, okay, you're talking about Christian nationalism. Not really sure what that is or how that fits into Christianity at large. You make a distinction that I feel like in all the books I've read on Christian nationalism, this isn't made as much as it should be made, and I appreciated how you said it. So here's your quote. At times, it may seem like the stories I share relate more closely to conservative evangelical culture in America than just straight Christian nationalism. That's because the two have become so intertwined that it can be really hard to spot the differences. It's one of the more difficult things about stopping Christian nationalism. It hides in plain sight as regular old American Christianity. Here's why I really appreciate that distinction. I think most people hear conservative evangelical culture and they think that's a good thing, right? Like the typical Christian probably hears that phrase and goes, yeah, that's healthy. I think more and more people are hearing the phrase Christian nationalism, hopefully at least if you're listening to this podcast, and you're going, that's a bad thing. Like, that's not good. How do you think we can help people better understand how these are connected so that it's not hiding in plain sight like it has been?
Yeah. Well, that's the hard part too, because so many people think, like, I think a good chunk of American evangelicals have had their faith co-opted by nationalism, but they don't know it. Like, a good chunk of them believe, as I did, that you have to vote Republican if you're a Christian. Like, that's the Christian party, which is nationalism in and of itself. It's conflating a political ideology with your theology. But I think we have to make a distinction between the two because there are differences. Like, you can hold to a traditional sexual ethic that you believe comes from the Bible and not be a nationalist. But the where the line is I will not do that because it goes against my beliefs. That's okay. That's totally fine. Like, and if you're like trying to convince your family of that, like, whatever, but like that's just you being true to your own beliefs. Where it goes into a nationalistic territory is when you say you cannot do that thing because it goes against my beliefs, and when you then try to make that into law because other people do not believe that. That's when it becomes nationalism. So it's not necessarily that the beliefs are inherently nationalistic. It's when they try to legislate morality and try to make it everybody's problem. But yeah, it's so I mean, Christian nationalism goes way back. It's not a new thing. It didn't start with Trump. Trump made it a little more obvious because he was clearly Trump. I mean, I don't know if I need to explain, but like clearly an immoral, narcissistic, like a very he's not the Antichrist, but he is a Antichrist character in how he behaves and how he treats people. Like there's nothing Christ-like about that man. And here you had all these Christians making excuse after excuse after excuse and just championing him as some hero of the faith. And so that just made the nationalism more obvious because you're like, okay, well, clearly we're not following the teachings of Jesus here. But it goes way back to like just colonizing America and the doctrine of discovery that the Pope put out where he was saying it basically gave permission to explorers that if you come across a land and those people are not Christian, that gives you the rights to take their land so you can make them Christian because of eternity and all of that. And then you see that with Manifest Destiny, with the colonies here in America. So it's always been a little bit in our nation. The Constitution, though, was very anti-Christian nationalism, despite what Christian nationalists may say with the separation of church and state. But yeah, it's hard to convince people because when you're in that world and you are a Christian, an evangelical, you believe you're a good person. Like you want to be good. You want to follow the teachings of Jesus. You believe that you're loving all people. Like those are good things to love your neighbor and all that stuff. But when you're conditioned week after week after week by your pastor, and then it's reinforced by listening to your Christian talk radio and you watch your Christian television shows, you can literally get Christian news, Christian talk shows, like and they're all saying like, we don't tell you who to vote for. We just tell you to vote for biblical values. But the biblical values that they tell you to vote for are just Republican values. And they completely ignore, welcoming the foreigner that Jesus talked about and taking care of the poor and the widow and the orphan and healing the sick and like all of these things that are also biblical values, but those are liberal ideals. So those are bad. And so but that's when you're taught that what you're voting for is a biblical value, it's really hard to see the nationalism in that because you think you're just being a good Christian.
Right. Well, and I suppose if someone, let's say they're wrestling with this idea and they're like, yeah, but that's not my desire. I don't want to legislate it. I just believe it's what's best. So like they may have a belief, let's take a sexual ethic or whatever it is. And they say, well, this is the best way to live. So I want other people to experience that. I think that's where abortion, conversation gets really tricky is people are saying, no, this is what's best, for other people. So that's where they want to legislate it. How do you help people caution themselves against that need, that desire to say, yeah, but this is such a good idea. It's got to be pushed on other people.
Well, I think you look at history, for one. I mean, the majority of the German evangelical church completely supported Hitler and his rise to power. And in fact, they ousted Bonhoeffer and said that he was going against what God wanted by speaking out, like, for one. And then two, like, you have to just show, like, I understand you think that is best, but you do not know everything. You do not know everybody's situation. And you have to just let people live and make those decisions for themselves and know that what you think is best doesn't mean that you're right just because you think that way. And I do think too, like especially like the abortion issue, so much of what we are taught in conservative evangelical culture is such a sensationalized view of what abortion actually is. Like, so you are saying things that you think are best based on a lot of misinformation and disinformation about what abortion is. Like, I was never once taught that a D&C is the exact same procedure, whether it's for an abortion or for a miscarriage. And when you try to ban all abortions, you're putting women who are not even wanting to have an abortion in harm's way because then doctors are refusing to give them care that they need to live. Like, they're just working from an ignorant standpoint. And so you have to find a way to I don't know, like it's just not your business. Like we've been taught like to be involved in like the whole proselytizing thing, like their blood's going to be on your hands if you don't say something. Like, no, like that whole mindset is just so harmful in and of itself, because not only are you trying to tell people what to do, but you yourself cannot have genuine relationships because you always have an ulterior motive. You're not actually trying to get to know the person. You're trying to save the person, or you're trying to manipulate their behaviors because you don't think what they're doing lines up with your beliefs. And that's just messed up.
Amen. Oh, good. Okay, so after hearing some of your journey, and this is certainly probably true if someone reads the book as well, I'm imagining there are people that are going to say, like, well, then why are you still a Christian? Like, there's so many things that have been so negative to you, but
Yeah.
you're very clear. You're still a Christian. You just moved way beyond a lot of the version of Christianity that you inherited. So how do you answer that if someone were to say, well, why not just get rid of all of this junk? Why do you still hold to that?
Sure. I mean, fair. And I will say, like, to be honest, like, there's been several days where I'm like, I'm going to leave the Christian label behind because they're ruining it. Like,
yeah.
So there's a couple of reasons. One, I still love Jesus. I've had spiritual experiences that I cannot explain, and the language that I had for the divine that I felt is Jesus. I still very much value the teachings of Jesus. I think the story in the Gospels are powerful. And I think if we all genuinely were following the teachings of Jesus, that the world would be a better place. So that's why I am personally still call myself a Christian, because I still hold to following, like, I still would say I'm a follower of Jesus. And I also think, too, still keeping the label Christian gets me in places that I wouldn't be able to go otherwise. In like, this is going to sound a little cringy because it kind of sounds like I'm a missionary to Christian nationalists, but I kind of feel that way in a weird way. Like I feel like, if not me, who, like someone's got to try to reach these people because they are causing so much harm. And I don't think a good majority of people realize how dangerous a Christian nationalist country would be. I mean, I know how serious I was when I was in it. And granted, I thought I was doing the right thing, but you have Christian nationalist men today in Twitter, which is like the cesspool of the world. And these are pastors with enormous influence who are actively, openly wanting a Christian nation, but not the Christian nation that Jesus talked about, like the Beatitudes, like blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who are meek and mild. Like, no, they want Jesus roaring like a lion, and they want to literally capitally punish heretics, which isn't just people who are not Christian. That goes for progressive Christians or any type of Christianity that they believe does not follow their line. They want women to lose the right to vote. They want women to basically stay in the home nonstop. And they think that women gaining any sort of influence on America or in the nation is what has led to like the moral decline of America. Like, these men are so patriarchal, like would want The Handmaid's Tale to be a reality, like that extreme. And these men are so close to power. Some of them, Pete Hegseth is one of those men, and Donald Trump just nominated him to be the Secretary of Defense. Like, it's actually a very scary thing, and I don't think most people who are in this world who even voted for Trump realize that Christian nationalism would not be good for them either, because the people that want to legislate these laws, those laws are going to harm everybody. There's going to be, like, they're not going to pick you, especially like these women that are out there cheering for Trump. Like, they're voting against their own interests. Now, okay, I got a little lost. I forgot what you asked me. I kind of went off on a tangent. I will also say, as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
Yes, I love it. That was a question on why you follow Jesus. So
that's what it was.
That was a great answer. I love it. And
yes, because I can talk, because I love Jesus. And also, it also really pisses Christian nationalists off that I say I'm a Christian, because they will, I mean, they say I'm not, for the record. Like, they're like, you're not a Christian. You're not a true Christian. You've never been a Christian in your entire life. But it really makes them mad And honestly, I have a little bit of a stubborn streak, and it pisses me off the way they have run the name of Jesus through the mud. So I'm like, no, you cannot tell me that I'm not a Christian when I'm actually following the teachings of Jesus, and you're trying to kick the foreigners out, like, and separate families and throw them in cages, and literally voted for like a quadruple time adulterer who slept with a porn star and paid it off and said he's never asked God for forgiveness, and you say he's a hero of the faith. Miss me with the fact that I'm the one that's not a Christian.
Wow.
I got a little spicy there. It's the peach
that's gonna be-
wine.
That's going to be a clip on social media right there.
Perfect.
That was fantastic. We should just wrap it up. Close in prayer. That was great.
Bow your heads, close your eyes.
Okay. I'm loving this. All right. So now, as if that couldn't be topped, I want to read what I think is my favorite quote from the book.
Oh, yay. I'm curious. I want to know what it is.
Probably not what you're expecting.
Okay.
But this was one for a number of phrases in this paragraph. I'm going to read the whole paragraph. I literally laughed out loud. Like, I'm in my backyard chuckling to myself, and I'm thinking this is a hysterical observation, but also there's so much meaning to it. So here we go, dear listeners. My favorite quote of her book. You write this. One of my favorite fights in the early church, which you got me already at that sentence of like your favorite fight. I just thought was such a funny way to word that. So I'm already like, I like the way you're phrasing this. One of my favorite fights in the early church occurred in Acts 15, when Christian men argued about their penises. They debated whether or not salvation depended on a man's crotch turtle shedding its shell. I mean, naturally, the men thought it all came down to their penises, right? Christ may have busted open the gates of heaven, or not, depending on who you asked, but men were still men. I always wonder what the women were doing while the men theologically discussed their privates. Like, do we not exist? Maybe the men wanted women quiet because vaginas would just confuse their theology.
I'm really glad that you appreciated that, because when I wrote that, I was like, this is so funny. I hope someone else thinks this is funny.
I think I had to like put it down for a second and just go like, that's an incredible paragraph. When Christian men argued about their penises, which you're not wrong. I mean, like, we don't say it like that, but
That's what they did.
What a hilarious way to summarize Acts 15. I mean, and if you're offended, dear listener, she's summarizing Acts 15 in a very practical way. So, well, here's my question. How do we untangle men from some of the crazy theology today? Because the majority of it comes from men, the crazy stuff. How do we do this, especially, and this is where we need women to help us, if many men still see women with skepticism, right? So, like, many women can't get onto a pulpit on a weekend stage at a church, right? Which is why, podcasting and new forms of content are huge, because they're allowing women's voices to get into places where historically have been, kept out by the gatekeepers. How do we, I mean, you're pointing out some of the absurdity of how guys get wrapped up in weird theology. What do you see from a woman's point of view? How do we move forward in a better way?
Well, that's a great question, because you also, in order to see change, you have to rely on men to listen, which is a task in and of itself.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would say that's why it's so important to have men who don't subscribe to a more patriarchal, misogynistic view of scripture to speak out, because there are literally men, like, I mean, to this day, I probably get this comment at least once a week where they like to quote that Timothy, is it 2 Timothy or 1 Timothy, where it's like, women must be silent. One of the Timothys. My wine is kicked in, so I don't remember which one, but it doesn't matter. But I get quoted that at me
Paul
all the
said
time.
somewhere.
I know, Paul. Well, yeah, I was like, Paul said you need to be quiet. I'm like, no, he didn't. He was writing a letter to a very specific church, and I was not in that letter whatsoever. But yeah, like, so they won't listen to me, and I acknowledge that. And I will say there are a certain group of men who I think are Christians because of the power their version of Christianity gives them. They get to be kings of their own household. Like, literally, that's how they view themselves. And which also, as a sidebar, I really do think one reason why it's so easy for so many white evangelicals to support Donald Trump despite his authoritarian kind of kink he's got going with, I mean, he said he'd be a dictator for a day. Like that, for whatever reason, that doesn't bother them at all. And I really think it's because we've been trained as a culture, and especially in like megachurch environment, that the pastor can do no wrong, that you don't touch God's anointed, that whatever the pastor says or does is almost like hearing from the voice of God. And if someone tries to say that he's being, like that someone accuses him or something, they're like, no, that he's being attacked, he's being persecuted because of who he is. And like, so it's an easy step to go from that when that's what you're trained to do. Same thing in the home. Like the wife always has to listen to what the husband says. She doesn't question her husband. She obeys her husband. It's easy to go from that mindset to saying, oh, Donald Trump can do no wrong. He's just being persecuted by the left because he's actually God's chosen. Like he didn't actually do any of that stuff. This is persecution. And like literally you have people who will not believe anything that they read in the news despite any sort of fact or statistic, but they will believe Donald Trump of all people because we've been conditioned. We've also been conditioned to believe that the majority of the world is out to get us and that Satan has his claws in every single facet of society that's not Christian. And so you automatically have this distrust of any expert, regardless of their credentials, because they could be led astray by Satan. But really we can believe, our podunk pastor over here because he said he's of God. Like, right. So you can easily, anyway. But how do we reach men? I actually remembered the question this time. I think some of them are too far gone, if I'm being honest. But what we need are men to be humble and to realize that just because they were born with a penis, that doesn't mean that they can just do whatever they want and that they're somehow better than women. But, that's, how do you get them to admit that?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to talk about it. And I think you're raising an uncomfortable observation for many people, but it's one that I think there's a lot of merit to. Of a lot of these church systems have unintended consequences that then lead over to these other realities, right? Where when you go to a church with a model of the pastor is above reproach and above anything, that is unhealthy. And if you cannot sit in a weekend and say, hey, that's bizarre, what was just said, or hey, some of the things that he's doing are bizarre. Like if you don't live in that culture, that's going to lead to some really negative things and an environment that's ripe for abuse. And we're seeing that play out, all over the place. So I appreciate that. Okay, a couple more quotes I want to ask you about. You have this one sentence that was so profound and so succinct, but I loved it. You tell the story, and then you said this: it takes a large amount of cognitive dissonance to continually be treated so well by people who are supposed to be evil. And this comes off of a story where you wanted to hate someone and you were trying your best to be against them, but you just couldn't because they actually weren't the evil person they were made out to be. I think this is so good. And it's also why we need to get more Christians in contact with people who they have been told are their enemies, whether that be people in the LGBTQ community, Muslims. I mean, it could be anyone, right? That is kind of portrayed as these are the enemy. Do you have any ideas? How do we do that better? Get Christians around people who they have been kind of stereotypically told these are your enemy?
That's a good question because like almost you have to be intentional if you're in that world to meet new people because you have the ability to not ever step out of your comfort zone because like Christian nationalism has been very intentional about being able to provide everything anyone could need inside that circle so that they don't meet anybody from the outside, because meeting other people of different beliefs and seeing that they're not demons or possessed or evil, that does so much damage to a very fundamentalist ideology, because it provides nuance. If you suddenly realize that that your Hindu neighbor is not worshiping demons in their home, and that they're actually very kind, and that they love their families, and they have a beautiful culture, then suddenly you've brought nuance to the conversation, and nuance is a dogma killer. And so Christian nationalism can only exist if their followers who support that system and support that ideology hold on to their dogma, because nuance would kill Christian nationalism. It's a very black and white ideology. So the hard part is that, and Christian nationalism too, like Christian media, the influence that they have, like there's literally like Christian news shows like CBN, the 700 Club. There's Christian movies. There's entire Christian TV channels. There's, obviously Christian politicians. There is a Christian version for everything that you can find in the world, even science. You've got the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum that Ken Ham put on, which is like insane how factually wrong that is. This is a sidebar. We actually went to the Ark over the summer because a podcast invited us to go to get our like live reaction, and it was a little bit triggering. It was a lot of it triggering actually, because like they literally have like hell threats like throughout it, and there's like kids in there. There was like this anyway. But the one thing that just blew my mind out of all of the just factual, they had a timeline of the whole world, like of the human existence, and it started with creation.
6,000 years ago?
Yes, 6,000 years. Yeah. So creation was like year 0, right? And then it brought us to like the year 2000, whatever it was, modern time. And then right about here, they have Noah's Ark, the great flood, right? Where everyone except 8 people died in the world. And they had that on a giant plaque too. They're like, everyone except 8 people died. And there was literally like a mom with her kids. She told her 4-year-old, like, kid, everyone except 8 people died. Wow. I'm like, this is traumatizing. Anyway, so they had the creation of the world, Noah's Ark. And then after Noah's Ark was the Ice Age.
Oh, that's confusing.
So literally, like, as the Bible's being written at some point in the Hebrew Old Testament, maybe like King David, there was just like woolly mammoths walking around because the Ice Age was happening. Anyway, that just blew my mind, just factually wrong. But yeah, so like that whole world, to their point, is like they create a world, and the war that they have in education, to, they talk about public schools as like being war zones, not because of school shootings, because Christians are persecuted, and so they're literally trained to not listen to any outside information, and to be in a bubble, because Satan's out to get you. Satan's around any corner. They want you to doubt your faith. So it's built into the belief system. So it can be very hard to penetrate, but that can only happen for so long. At some point, someone's going to meet somebody that goes against their beliefs, and usually you have 2 choices when that happens. You either embrace the doubt and explore that and see, like, something feels off here. I need to figure out why, or you shove it down. And I would say a good chunk of people, because the belief system is so tightly knit, that if you pull on one little doubt, it's very easy for everything to unravel. So I do think most people just shove everything down because they don't want to have an existential crisis, because that is exactly what would happen, and that's not fun. So they're, especially if you're like a pastor, or, you're in ministry and your livelihood is dependent on you keeping the beliefs that you have for your entire life. If you want that paycheck, then you have extra reason to shove down any doubts and to not meet other people that might bring up questions. So yeah, I mean, and I don't want to put the burden of, the emotional labor on people who are not Christian. But, part of that is like, if you meet a Christian, just be kind, and, show them that you're not evil. And because like if you give them an inch, like I remember like when I would make posts or whatever, if someone like an atheist came in and was like, oh, you believe in Sky Daddy? Literally, I would like, it'd be part of my testimony in small group the next week, being like, I was persecuted for my faith. Like it just like reinforces the narrative that they have, so not that they deserve it, because they could be, we could be pretty cruel in that world, even though we think we're being loving. But yeah, sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, that was great. I love it.
I keep
Okay,
going
one
on these
more.
tangents because of this peach wine.
That's why we do this podcast. This is we get the real theology here.
It's good.
Okay. Another great insight you share, and this got me thinking about an ongoing conversation I have with friends of mine, so I want you to weigh in on this. The quote that triggered the thought was, you say, even now, if it gets too quiet in my house, my first thought is that I've been left behind. Which you're just talking about, like, literally theological PTSD of how you were raised and all this. So I have an ongoing conversation with some friends of mine who have also come out of conservative evangelicalism, and it involves raising our kids. And the question is it better to give our kids a traditional conservative foundation like we had, and then kind of bring them to where we are so they have seen all of it and they've been exposed to it? Or is it better to skip all of that, fast forward to the end? But the kind of the lingering doubt on that theory is, do they then later in life, someone exposes them some like conservative theology they've never heard before, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is the most brilliant hot take. And you're like, no, it's not. It's not brilliant. You know, so it's like we all came from this background into this trajectory. That's how we got there. Should we try to help our kids do the same thing, or do we have to like acknowledge that was just our journey? They're going to have a different one. What's your take on that?
Okay. This is a great question because this is something my spouse and I have talked about so much because we have 2 daughters, 8 and 5, and we've literally been like, how do we raise them in a way with a faith that they don't have to heal from later? Like, we literally just started going to another church and the pastor said that, like, the first Sunday we visited, and we're like, oh, okay, this is where we want to be. So here's my opinion. And obviously I don't know. Like, Beecher and I were like, we know what a conservative upbringing produces. Both of us have anxiety and, you know, some religious trauma. And like, we know what that produces. We know that it's harmful because we came out of that world, but we at least know, like, we know what that produces. We have no idea what we're doing is going to produce, you know, like we're just trying our best, which I think is what any parent is doing. But I will say, and I wish I had the study to back this up, but I don't remember what it was because Beecher had found there's this article that had a study that was just saying basically if you raise your children in any sort of fundamentalism, like if you raise them in like, we're very conservative Christian, this is what we believe, that your kids are going to be more likely to swing the complete other direction, like become atheists as a way of rebelling, or just like because they weren't taught the other side at all. So it's going to sound nice. Same thing with the reverse. Like if you raise someone really fundamentalist atheist that's like anti-religion and all this stuff, they're more likely to get sucked into like a fundamentalist Christianity or a cult or, you know, some sort of religion later on in life. But what they were saying is that if you give your kids a little bit of religion, it's kind of like a vaccine in a way. Like it like protects them from like, they know enough about it to not be shocked when someone tells them these things, but they know, but not enough to like the beliefs are not impacting them in a harmful way because that's not like, we're not living by them. And so like, I mean, I'll just say what we do, which I have no idea if what we're doing is right or what, but I have a plan to like tell them, here's what I believed growing up. This is what I was taught. This is what some people believe and presented that way. I was like, this is what other people believed. Like, this is what I believe, but ultimately you've got to make that decision for yourself. And I don't want to like force anything on them, but I also, you know, our main goal is to have just an open dialogue with our kids always, where they can come to us with anything and we're not going to react in a judgmental or, you know, a freaking out kind of way, and just like be a safe place for them to ask questions. I will say like my biggest fear is, well, I have 2 main fears. Like, I never did drugs or alcohol or slept around because I was terrified of going to hell and I didn't want to soul tie, you know, like with whoever I had sex with. So like, that was why I didn't do that. So I'm like, I still don't want I still don't want my kids to do that because there are practical reasons of why that could be harmful that have nothing to do with religious shame, like when they're like underage and in high school and stuff. So I have a fear of that, just because I know what kept me from doing that, and they're not going to have that, boundary. So,
Right.
but my other big fear is that they get sucked into a cult, and that like some youth group kid, basically if like a high school version of me when I was in high school comes through and like tries to save their soul and bring them to youth group, and they're like, your parents are going to hell, and they come back, they're like, Mom, so-and-so said you're going to hell and you need to come to church. Like, that's my biggest fear. But honestly, if that were to happen, I'd be like, child, sit down. I've got a story for you. And be like, I've been there. I believed that. I don't think that's helpful or healthy. And then, like I can show her biblically and theologically, like why I don't believe that anymore. And so hopefully that is enough of a barrier. But anyway, that's our goal. We actually recently just started going to a new church. It's a Methodist church, but they're affirming. And one of our oldest daughter's Sunday school teacher is a trans woman. And that was like, I think that's the first trans woman she's met like in person. My spouse is non-binary, but this is the first like trans woman she's met. And we were just talking about how cool it is that the first time she encountered a trans person was in a church setting.
Yeah.
And in a way that was like, these things can coexist and not in a demonizing way, like that our kids can grow up around queer people. And like, I didn't know a single queer person until like I was in college, and the person that I thought was queer and was in the closet at the time because we were at a Christian school, like I think, I don't know. I'm hopeful that them seeing healthy versions of faith will protect them from the unhealthy versions of faith, as opposed to just throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Okay, that vaccine analogy is killer. I'm gonna run with that. That is so good. And if it makes you feel better, I realized that we have become the family that my kids' Christian friends are trying to convert now.
Same,
I was on a school, like one of their little walks where they, I don't know, raising money or something. And I'm with my daughter and we're walking around and she's got one of her friends and then her friend's mom. And on this walk, her friend's mom starts telling me like, oh, I'm glad our daughters are friends and all this. And then she says, hey, I just wanted to say, I hope it's not too forward, but I don't know if you'd ever be willing to check it out, but like, here's this church we go to. We would love to have your family come with us. And I like had this moment where I was like, oh my gosh, they're like, we're the people they're trying to convert now. And the funny part about that was I happened to be really good friends with the pastor of her church. And so I said, oh, so-and-so is a great friend of mine. I love that guy. And she had no box to put that in because it was like, you're not saved. You don't go to church every week. I know your daughter doesn't do this. How could you know a pastor? Like it was just funny, but it is funny. Like, but we're raising our kids very differently. I grew up in the pews. I was there multiple times a week, and my kids are not. And so it is interesting, and I think that's a super helpful analogy. Okay, we're gonna pivot. We're going to ask you a wine question, and then we're going to go to our speed round of questions I like to end with each guest.
Okay.
So here's the pivot. And I'm excited for this answer based on how much of your peach wine you've had so far. If I were to ask you, as an admittedly not super wine person, but you obviously have wine that you drink and you enjoy. If I were to say, April, what's like the best memory you have, the greatest glass of wine you've ever had, or the best bottle you've ever had in your life? Is there a moment that comes to mind? Was it with certain people? Was it a certain glass, a certain bottle? What's like the best wine moment you've ever had? Can you think of something?
Yes, I guess. It's more of a funny story, I guess. When my spouse and I, we were just married. So like we were newlyweds, and we lived in Virginia at the time. And so we like drove to get away for a few days in Charlottesville, Virginia. And that's like wine country. There's so many vineyards out there. And so we decided to just vineyard hop and do a bunch of different wine tastings. And so we went to 3 different ones. And
in one day?
Yeah, in one day.
That's a lot.
Well, we didn't know, okay?
Yeah.
We didn't know. We heard about this. People were like, oh yeah, you can just go to a bunch of different ones and try different wines. I will say this was our first time to ever do wine tastings. So, because we both
know where this story's going.
So we both grew up like not drinking. Like alcohol was never in our homes. Like we were kind of new drinkers, I guess,
So
because
you
we were.
decided just to go for it.
Yeah, we're like we're newly married. We can do this now, and so, but I will say we didn't know until the third vineyard that we went to that most people when they sip the wine that they just sip it and then dump the rest like in that container thing. We were downing our whole like glasses, like they gave us the glass like because the first two we went to we were the only ones there. So the box we saw the little box thing there, but we didn't know what that was. So we drank the whole thing. We drove to the next one, drank the whole thing, drove to the next one. By the third one, we had probably had, I don't know, 4 or 5 glasses of wine at this point. And ironically, this was Trump's vineyard. I think it was owned by his son. And this was like in 2014. So this was like before Trump was who, like, he was just the guy from The Apprentice at this point. So we're like, oh, Trump's vineyard, And and so we're at the third one and we take a sip and I see the people, there are other people at this one, dump the rest of theirs in whatever that thing is called. And then suddenly I realized like I'm drunk. And I looked at Beecher and Beecher's like, I'm drunk too. And I'm like, I think we were supposed to be dumping our wine into the thing. And so we literally just we were like, can we have some water? So we literally had to go sit down for like an hour and a half and just drink tons of water to sober up so that we could drive back to our little bed and breakfast that we were staying at.
Nice.
So that's it was fun though. It was a fun experience because, I don't know, we probably looked stupid. We're like, we need to sober up because we were unprepared for how much wine we were going to be drinking.
Yeah, so we do wine tours in Oregon. We've led groups through that, and I used to do 3 different stops, and then I realized people are hammered after 3 stops. Like the typical person cannot, even if they're dumping, cannot handle that much wine. And so now we try to keep it to like 2 in a day because that way you can remember it all, you can enjoy it all. And again, if you're having nice high-end wine, I always it hurts me for people to dump it when it's like, that's a $150 bottle of wine that you're like, whoop, just dump it. I had a sip, So yeah, that's funny. But 3 in a day, I did 4 in a day once. Like one time we did it and I barely remember the 4th. And that's where we were like, yeah, that was 4's too many. 4 is that's too many. So
that makes me feel better though, because we just thought we're like, oh, we're such lightweights, like that we were just maybe
3's a lot.
Okay, well that makes me feel a little bit better.
No, you're on track. 3's a lot. All right, let's get to our lightning round here. All right, what is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
The rapture.
You want to
Am I supposed to expound? Oh.
Well, it's up to you. This is your answer.
Yeah, I believed that the rapture was like essential Christianity, and then when I learned that it wasn't a belief in Christianity until the 1830s, I was pretty pissed because that caused me some trauma.
Yeah, you talking about, I'm trying to remember who you had the conversation with in the book, but you're like, where are the verses for this? And they're like, well, it's not exactly.
Yeah, we pull it from this word because in Latin it means this. And I'm like, how did we get all of Left Behind books like from that? Like I felt I felt misled and lied to.
Yeah, that's legitimate.
Yeah.
What do you see as the main issues facing Christianity in America today?
Christian nationalism, for sure. And combating that and trying to get people to follow the way of Jesus instead of the way of political power and influence that the church has become associated with.
What is something that's blowing your mind right now?
The aliens in the ocean.
Okay, I'm going to need you to elaborate on this because I don't know what you're
talking about. There's not actually aliens, but there's literally another congressional hearing in the last couple weeks that said they found more. They don't call them UFOs anymore, but basically it's like an unidentified object that they don't know what it is, but they found a bunch of these little like glowy orb things in the middle of the ocean. And so a lot of people are saying that they're aliens, but because of the news and cycle and how chaotic the world is, it's kind of flying under the radar.
Oh, the UFOs are flying under the radar, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
See what I did there?
Mm-hmm.
What is a problem that you are trying to solve?
How to survive the next 4 years.
Oof. How's it going solving it? You feel like
I haven't solved it yet. I'm more in the disassociate phase. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm hoping democracy survives.
can we check back in with you to see if you've solved that?
Yes,
near
please,
future?
please do.
'Cause that
And
would
also,
be
if
great.
you've solved it, whoever, if someone else has solved that conundrum,
That's a good one. What's something you're excited about right now?
what am I excited about? I guess Christmas. I love Christmas. It's coming up. I don't know. Is this airing before Christmas?
It will, yes.
Okay, good. Then Christmas. That's relevant. And I have family coming in from Texas.
Otherwise,
and I haven't.
I will edit this whole section out.
Yeah, no, I love Christmas. I used to be a little bit of a Scrooge because I felt like I always had this anticipation that there'd be Christmas magic, and of course there never was. Even though I knew like it doesn't actually exist and it's all manufactured by the parents and like corporate greed. But
wow,
I know. But I love that my kids like seeing my kids experience Christmas magic. I've found myself being a big Christmas person again.
What's your favorite Christmas movie?
Christmas Vacation.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. Is there anything else you want to add that I have not asked you about that we cannot conclude this conversation without addressing?
Oh, can I amend my last answer?
Yes, you can.
My favorite Christmas movies are actually the Lord of the Rings trilogy because I believe they count as Christmas movies.
Wow. First Die Hard, now this? You're going to put that into the
Yes,
the
because
mix?
listen, every single movie was released in December. So you already like have associated with the holidays. And The Lord of the Rings, it features snow. It has elves. It has singing. It has old men with long white beards. It has evergreen trees. It's got true love and friendship. It has everything that a good Christmas movie like is made out of.
Is this the wine talking? Be honest, April.
No, I've made this argument before.
So you're not coming up with this on the spot.
No, I've thought this through.
This makes me feel a little better, but man, what a hot take today.
That's my
folks.
take. Yeah.
I've never heard that. That is, I'm gonna have to process that.
Yeah. I mean, every holiday season, I get in the mood to watch Lord of the Rings just as much as any other Christmas movie. I'm also a really big Lord of the Ring fan, though. I saw the first movie 7 times in the movie theaters. That's like, what is that?
In the theaters?
Yeah,
That's a lot of your life right there.
it is. I mean, I was 12. I didn't have much going on at the time.
that's
Didn't
fair.
have kids to take care of. And
Yeah.
I think my parents liked that it was 3 hours. So they could just drop us off. Free babysitting.
Now
But
you
yeah,
have like the extended versions that are what, 4 hours each?
yeah, it's a bit much. I don't recommend if it's your first time watching to watch the extended versions. I'm not like I'm a diehard and I appreciate the extended versions and I would watch them, but I'm also realistic and I know that not everyone's going to care about. And honestly, some of the scenes in the extended, it's like, yeah, I get why this was cut as it should have been.
Yeah, this is not as good as the rest.
Yeah.
Of it.
Yeah.
That's valid. I like it. Okay, so if someone is watching and listening to this and they're like, I like her, she's great, I want to see more of what she's producing, what's the easiest way for them to connect with you online?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. I don't know if TikTok's going away, but that's where this whole thing started, was on TikTok. So I have my biggest following there, but I'm at April Ajoy, Ajoy, on TikTok, Instagram. I'm still on Twitter, but I'm not posting as much because it's a cesspool. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads and Facebook and YouTube, and I'm pretty much everywhere. And also, if you want to hear me more on a more long format, I co-host the Friday episodes of the new Evangelicals with Tim Whitaker. We do a weekly recap of the news, but from a progressive Christian perspective. And then, just get my book, Star-Spangled Jesus, wherever books are sold. I also did the audiobook. So if you want to hear me narrate it to you, that's also an option.
Well, hey, this has been an absolute joy to talk with you. I love what you're doing. I love the journey you've been on. It's an encouragement for so many of us. And I'm super grateful for the work that you're doing. And you're offering a lot of really good help for a lot of people, myself included. So thank you for taking the time today to be on the podcast. Thanks for bringing your peach wine and being a good sport about it. We have thoroughly enjoyed having you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. And you had really good questions. You are a great interviewer.
Yes.
Interviewer.
No, you're the interviewee.
I'm the E, you're the er.
I'm the
You're a good
yes.
er.
Well, thank you very much. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for being a part of this episode of Cabernet and Pray. We will see you on the next one.